He so graciously decided to join me, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. I want to give him a good intro for his bio right here. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is Distinguished Visiting Professor of Government and Public Policy at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at the George Washington University School in Washington, D.C. He is also and probably best known as retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff to the United States Secretary of State Colin Powell. Professor, Colonel, welcome to the show, my man. How are you doing today, this morning?
Well, excuse me, I've been shoveling snow for about an hour and a half, so I'm a little worn out.
Have you? Have you? Yeah, it's a wintry day.
We were supposed to get 3 to 4. We got about 8.
Really? So are you still in Washington, D.C.?
Just outside in Falls Church, Virginia.
Okay. So you're not that far away from me. We're about an hour and 15 minutes, give or take away. Thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it. I always appreciate these visits. I need to start in Ukraine. So Zelensky has given an interview with The Guardian, and they've talked about all of these issues associated with Ukraine and everything else. And one of the things that has come up is this thing of land exchange. He effectively pointed out, well, hey, we'll give up territory. We'll exchange land. So we will give them parts of Kursk that we have taken, and they can give us some unspecified territory that we haven't necessarily defined yet that is going to be up for exchange. Now, Maria Zakharova has pointed out, effectively says something to the effect of, those soldiers that are in Kursk will be given land, and that land will be a grave. I'm paraphrasing. They will be buried. We're not exchanging anything in the context of any kind of land deal. We're going to win this war. It is going to be done by facts on the ground. That's what's going to decide this conflict. Donald Trump, in one of his statements, gave this kind of vague reference where he says, right here, the U.S. has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on Ukraine in recent years. Quote, they may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday. They may not be Russian someday. But we're going to have all this money in there. And I said I want it back. Okay, I would imagine that if you're Zelensky, what you don't want to hear is, hey, these people may be Russian someday. That is not the thing that you want the president of the United States to say on any circumstances. Give me your take on where we are today with what you hear coming out of Donald Trump on this issue of Ukraine. I am super curious on your framing of the new norm that is into effect with Donald Trump being in office.
I think what we're looking at increasingly, and I think what we looked at in his first term, very discombobulated because there were many, many people around him at that time, H.R. McMaster, James Mattis, and a host of others, who actually had a foot in the national security complex, if you will, of the United States, of the empire. So he had all these people, even though he often wouldn't listen to them, he nonetheless had them bouncing reasonably sane ideas, sane within the concept of maintaining the empire, off his head all the time. He no longer has that. He has people all around him who are principally now the Zionists, whom he is so beholden to, like Miriam Adelson and others, hurling thunderbolts at him all the time about this, that, and the other thing, but prominently about Gaza, of course, and secondarily about Ukraine. And he has an 80-year-old, I'm 80 years old now, so I can say this, general who's his special envoy to that place. And he has an absolute unconscionable tyrant leading Ukraine in Volodymyr Zelensky, who is growing more and more frantic every day that goes by. So anything you hear coming out of Donald Trump has to be couched in these terms. He's not an ignorant man, except he's an ignorant man. He's a smart man, but he's ignorant. Ignorant meaning lacking the knowledge of what he's talking about. So in terms of national security issues, he is purely ignorant. He has no idea what he's talking about. So whatever last word reaches him, now primarily from the Zionists and ultra-Zionists, is what he's going to pronounce. Look at what he said the other day about the United States buying Gaza. The United States can't buy Gaza.
Right.
Gaza's owned by Israel. Every lock, stock, and barrel of that territory is owned by the national security complex of Israel. Even Israeli citizens don't own their land. They lease it from the security complex. Everything in Israel virtually is owned by the security complex, even those so-called billionaires and complexes and things that we've underwritten to come up and be predatory capitalists just like us. It's ultimately owned by the national security state called Israel. So he doesn't know any of these things, Jamal. He knows none of this. He just shoots from the hip all the time based on his own concept of how to do deals. And that's causing him enormous problems right now. Problems with Netanyahu, problems with Zelensky, and maximal problems with Vladimir Putin, who, to get to your point of your question, is not going to give him an inch. Not an inch.
Well, that's effectively what they said.
They own the territory they occupy. They are going to own that territory. There's no way Zelensky or Trump or anyone else is going to get that territory back, short of a full-scale NATO conflict with Russia. And none of us want that. I don't even think Donald Trump would be ignorant enough to want that. So we're at an impasse right now, an impasse that could last for months and months, even years, unless Trump breaks through this juggernaut of bad advice he's getting and bad advice coming from Zelensky as well. Unless he breaks through that, we're going to have a stalemated war that's going to kill more and more people.
You know, the last time that we spoke, you pointed out that you could make a deal. That if Trump decided to put you in the position to have conversations with Putin, Zelensky, or whoever in those conversations, that there were things that could be exchanged to make this issue of the Ukraine war, if not go away. Well, yeah, go away. I'll use that term. To end the war, to end the conflict itself. What would it be? What would you exchange? Like, what would be that conversation that you would have that you think would be, let's say, a middle ground that would allow both sides to kind of say, okay, fair enough, we can call this a day. We can end this war. What would it be?
This would, of course, have to be purely hypothetical because there's no way you could trust Trump. If I walked into the Oval Office and I said, Mr. President, I have a deal and I can work it if you'll just let me go to Moscow, he might say a few things and then he'd say, okay, go ahead, do it, see what you can do. If he would do that. I'm not sure he would. Because he wouldn't be at the center of it. Yeah, that's what I said. This is hypothetical. Yeah. Let's say he dispatches me. Well, the first thing I'd do after landing in Moscow is I would go see Sergei Lavrov. And I would sit down with Sergei and I would ask for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. I wouldn't force it in any way. I'd ask for it from the foreign minister. And with the foreign minister, I'd probably have an hour or two long conversation beginning on my side after the pleasantries were over with Mr. Foreign Minister. My boss, Colin Powell, trusted you infinitely. You know that. You and he talked all the time. We had a much better relationship then. I come from that world. I know I'm an emissary of the current president of the United States, but I come from that world. That's the first thing I want you to understand. The second thing I want you to understand, Mr. Foreign Minister, is that we're guilty. We're 100% guilty. You and your president were right all along. We could have stopped this war before it even got well started, and we screwed the pooch on that. We, the empire, the American empire, what you call the heinous West, did it. Mea culpa. We are guilty. I am here now representing a president who is so mercurial that I don't even know if I get an agreement with you on basic terms and go back to Washington, that he won't throw me out of the Oval Office and hire somebody else. I simply don't know that. We're so duplicitous. But if you're willing to trust me for this moment in time and to begin a process that might lead to the end of this conflagration in Ukraine, then please do so. And let me see your president. Then I would go, if he said, okay, let's go see the president, he'd go with me. He's no fool. He'd go with me. And we'd sit down in front of Vladimir Putin and I'd essentially say the same thing. And I would hope that Sergei would say, this man's probably serious. And he's right. We can't trust the guy who sent him here, Donald Trump. You know that. He knows that. I know that. But I think it's worth a try. And I would propose to him that we sit down at a neutral place, not Moscow. We could go to Geneva a week later. Sergei, Vladimir, me, and I hope I can talk Donald into coming along, if not one of his emissaries, not one of the cabinet members, but someone he would appoint, like Witkoff. whom I could tell before we got on the plane, I'm in charge, dude. If you don't understand that, get off the plane. And then I go back to the president and get another emissary. Then we would negotiate, truly negotiate. And I would hope that the momentum of our negotiations and the positive reports I would send back to Washington would get Trump aboard. And we'd have an end to it. And the end would be essentially what the Newsweek article that was leaked many weeks ago now that said it was the Trump position. And I assume somebody in the Trump administration with a brain leaked it. All of those points are valid. And those points are pretty simple. Putin gets every damn thing that he wants except further territory in Ukraine. He gets the territory that he's occupied. Now, he has said he wants a little bit more than that. And he's fast at work right now, slower now because of the drones that have been attacking his front lines. But he's fast at work trying to consolidate those so it won't even be a negotiating point. He'll have troops on the ground there. But at any rate, we could negotiate over that. But the other points are quite clear. No NATO membership in the future ever for Ukraine. If the world freezes over tomorrow morning, that'll still be our promise. If it takes 1,000 years, that'll still be our promise. Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Never. You know that 100-year treaty that the guy in London signed, that idiot in London, Starmer? Well, we'll sign a 1,000-year treaty. No NATO. Second, we're not even sure we want Ukraine to be a member of the EU. We'll let the EU decide that, but I'm not sure we're going to be supportive of that. And then third, we recognize your sovereignty over Crimea and your sovereignty over the territory you now occupy. We don't want a ceasefire. We don't want a peacekeeping force. We don't want anything in there. If the war starts again, we'll turn loose Ukraine and you can tear them off. I mean, that's the kind of negotiating I would do. And I would tell Zelensky, I would spit on Zelensky as I was flying over Kyiv to Moscow. And then as I was coming back from a temporary deal and supposed to show it to Zelensky, I'd spit on him again as I flew over Kyiv and go on to Washington. And I'd let Zelensky know by back channels that if he didn't get out of Ukraine and if they didn't have elections and put a new person in charge, constitutionally in charge, such as the constitution in Ukraine is, I'd take care of him myself. I'd send in a hit team. I mean, that's the kind of negotiating I do. I think in 2 months I could have a deal.
Now, what would the U.S., what would Moscow have to give for that deal? Because as you pointed out,
Moscow would have to stop. There's nothing to stop Moscow from taking Odessa, owning the entire northern rim of the Black Sea, which would be hell for the United States Navy and hell for Turkey too, because Turkey's got to, titularly speaking, the compacts and the rules are that Turkey has to bless entrance into that place. Of course, we'd force it in a heartbeat, and we'd force it against Russia too, but it'd be a much harder battle if they own the entire northern rim, including Odessa, Sevastopol, and that port to the east of Sevastopol. I forget the name of it now, but it's a major Russian port. So they'd own the whole northern rim of the Black Sea, and Putin could go ahead and take other parts of Ukraine that he might want to. I don't think he would do that, but I do think he would take Odessa. I do think he would take Odessa because that would cement their control of that body of water, which is a very strategic key body of water. And it would probably, if Putin wanted to, he could join Turkey. Erdogan might join him in this and forbid the United States ever to enter the Black Sea again with naval forces upon pain of war.
So the issue more so boils down to Russia has extensive control of the battlefield at this point. They seem to be expanding. And it seems that Ukraine is getting weaker in their capability of pushing back a Russian assault. And so the thought is, okay, well,
impossible. They can't do anything but fly drones at the Russian front lines and try to kill people with drones. They really have no manpower left. And that's the significant shortcoming of Ukraine, no manpower.
So if the U.S. engages in real diplomacy on this issue, and they get the Russia to say, okay, fair enough, we'll stop. Russia has pointed out that they don't necessarily want to freeze the conflict. And I guess from their point of view, freezing the conflict is allowing Ukraine to reload, to maybe get more manpower involved into the conflict itself. And so from their point of view, the moment that we stop, you guys are going to fill them up with bullets, guns, missiles, etc. And in the same way that Syria broke down into this kind of, we have this kind of freeze the moment that it became inconvenient for the Syrian government. That freeze ended, in which case they were attacked. I would imagine Moscow looks at that and thinks Ukraine is going to be the exact same thing. If we allow them, if we stop, they're going
I'm
to
sure
fill.
I'm sure Putin or Lavrov would bring that up in the talks. And what I would say to that would be there will be not a single armament, not a single dollar from the empire going to Ukraine once this deal is sealed. If our NATO allies, Germany in particular, decide that they want to continue to fund Ukraine, that's between you and Germany. That's between you and France. That's between you and Britain. But we will bring pressure to bear on them to do the same as we, not to do anything more for Ukraine. I'd make that agreement with him. And I agree with you. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He doesn't want a patrolled area. He doesn't want a demilitarized zone, anything like that. I would say that I will use the most influence that I have still with NATO and with Ukraine, and I will have presented them with a situation where they hardly can refuse to make sure that they don't resume the attack on you and to make
Yeah.
sure that they don't have the capacity to do that. And by the way, I think I don't have an Israel here. Now, the whole situation in Israel is different because they're our attack dog there. We
Right.
don't have an attack dog in Ukraine. We have some very sometimes indecipherable people in Berlin and Paris and elsewhere. So I couldn't absolutely guarantee that some of those capitals wouldn't start something, but I could guarantee that I would work out a deal, if not withdrawal completely from NATO. And I think that would be on the table at the end of the negotiations, because what I'd want to do is convince them, genuinely convince them that I'm interested in a new security architecture, just as Putin is for Europe from the Urals westward, a new security architecture, which includes from the very get-go, not ultimately, but from the very get-go, Russia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which Russia is a prominent member of, just like we are of NATO. And that would guarantee, I think, in the long term, if I could work it out, that CSTO disappeared and that NATO disappeared. And that this new European security architecture, primarily led by the Europeans, to include the Russians, because they're European too, from the Urals eastward or westward anyway, that'd be the ultimate goal. Is Putin's goal a new European security architecture?
Some of the reporting is that Donald Trump at the Munich Security Conference is going to push Ukraine onto Europe. Can Europe carry that burden by themselves?
No.
This is Europe shifts Ukraine's strategy as Trump pushes it into the war. It seems that Trump has come to the conclusion we're in a multipolar world. And because we're in a multipolar world, we need to act as if we're in a multipolar world, in which case he seems to care more about, let's say, Canada, Panama, those type of things, to try to create, I guess, a supercontinent, adding in Greenland as being part of this. And I guess part of this is, okay, this is our priority. Ukraine is your priority. Deal with it. And to your point, you're saying that Europe can't carry the burden of Ukraine, meaning the moment that the United States pulls out, then this war is over.
That's true, I think. And let me say this too. Trump's Fortress America concept, if that is even Trump's concept, I can't imagine Trump mouthing any platitudes or plans that aren't fed to him, because he knows nothing about this, Trump. He knows nothing. He's ignorant. And I don't mean that in a derisive sense. I mean it in a descriptive sense. He has no knowledge of this world. So he's got to depend on all those people around him. And that makes me really worried, because look at the people around him, some of them anyway. Hegseth has no grasp of international relations, no grasp of national security, and yet he's in charge of the Defense Department, the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth. But look at what Fortress America would be. Other than the United States, what would it be? It would be Canada, Mexico, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, go on down the list. Look at what the opposition, as it were, and I don't like to look at it that way, but let's look at it that way for a moment. Look at what it is. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, a host of other countries that are going to be counting the heads on the wall and saying, wow, do I want to stay in this relationship with the United States? Think Japan, think South Korea, think Australia, even think New Zealand, even. Do I want to stay in this relationship with the United States when they're becoming Fortress America and I'm not anywhere near it? So you've got the other side, as it were, extremely powerful, extremely wealthy, growing every day more so, particularly the center of it, China. And you got this side atrophying at best, and maybe even falling apart at worst. So Fortress America is not going to look like a fortress at all. It's going to look like a decaying empire, and an empire trying to maintain its writ when it is impossible to do so. And all the other side, as it were, has got to do is wait. It doesn't even have to put much pressure on this group that Trump is forming, Fortress America. It'll collapse of its own weaknesses. And what does China do then? Nothing, but it doesn't want this part of the world. It wants to trade with this part of the world, and therefore increase its economic prowess and might, and maybe increase its sway in terms of its currency and its economy. But China wants no war. They're the exact opposite of us. They think they're winning. They know they're winning. They want to just keep on winning, and they want to win a peace along with the victory that is economic, financial, and otherwise. Hegemonic? No. I don't think the Chinese really don't have a word except a derisive word for what we call global domination.
Right.
It's not a concept for the Chinese.
I'm curious, from your take, if you were sitting in the Defense Department today and you were looking out at the world, because I get the sense that Donald Trump he believes that, well, I can't say this. I don't know what's in his mind. I'm just going by the actions that he's taken so far up to this point.
Wow, you must have bounced all over the map.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my thought is he's looking at this stuff and he's thinking to himself, okay, America is receding to the background. The world is changing around us, and adjustments need to be made in the way that we're effectively operating around the globe. Part of that has to do with how much money was sitting in other countries, which again, it's like 1% of 1%, so it's not much. But part of it also has to do with influence and the way he's using that influence, where it's no longer our European partners, it's our vassals. And we're going to treat them as such, whether that's with the war, whether that's with NATO, because he's trying to get them to pay 5% into NATO, effectively saying, look, you need to pay more into this process, especially if you're going to try to take over the war and everything else. How would you be advising him in looking out at a world that is fundamentally changing in regards to the power centers? I mean, if you look at BRICS, for example, like as you pointed out, India, China, South Africa, Russia. Okay, this is a big conglomeration of power that is being accrued in an economic sense to confront what it considers to be America's domination with the dollar. Okay, well, how do you deal with that as a president of the United States when you see that accommodation or the accumulation of economic and what could end up being military power in order to protect that economic power? And you see Europe as a vassal state for all intents and purposes, or let's say a conglomeration of vassal states, that you may have things or interests that you want to get out of that European whatever. Because from my point of view, it seems that he's gotten to the point of saying, okay, Europe, this free ride is over. We're not going to continue to protect you in the way that we've protected you with NATO. And Europe is coming out saying, well, maybe we need to have our own European security arrangement. Is that what we're looking at? A breakdown in the relationship between America and Europe, with America looking at it as what was America first? We're going with our own priorities. Our priorities is the, as you say, Fortress America, to carve up the world. Whatever you're going to do is whatever you're going to do. You do it. Is that what we're looking at? A breakup of America and Europe as being this kind of unipolar force in the world, with America acknowledging that this is no longer a unipolar world?
Well, that's a heck of a lot that you just put on the table there.
I'm sorry.
The fundamental geopolitical, geostrategic concept for years now has been this business of he who controls Europe, the heartland, if you will, controls the globe. And that's what we've more or less operated on. We failed to recognize that for a long time, but when we did recognize it, we recognized it big time, and we built NATO to sort of deal with it. That's changed. I think I've pointed this out. I've done so many interviews. I don't remember if I did it on your show or not, but the huge change that's happening in the world is that power, I'm talking about real power, geopolitical power. I'm talking about military power, economic power, educational power, financial power, economic power, intelligence power, all the elements of power they teach in the schools is shifting. It's shifting just as it shifted 350, 400 years ago from where it was centered for almost 2 millennia from the East with China as its center point to the West. It's shifting back again. It's going away from the West towards China. And it's sweeping Central Asia with it, where if you've been to Samarkand, Dushanbe, Tashkent, any of those capitals, you understand the future is there. The future is not in the West anymore. It's there. And the momentum is inexorable as that power shifts. We intuitively, I think, not Donald Trump wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about if I talked to him about it, unless I could somehow put it in New York State real estate terms. He wouldn't understand what I was talking about. Donald, the real estate is shifting. The valuable real estate is that way, not that way. You're claiming real estate that isn't Panama. You're claiming real estate that's not all that valuable. The real estate that's valuable is that way, Donald. And all the power and the things that go with power are shifting that way. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but it's already happened to the extent where we recognize it intuitively, if not intellectually. And that's what we're fighting. We're fighting it tooth and nail. Joe Biden, Anthony Blinken, and Jake Sullivan were warriors in this attempt to stop this shift of power. They were leading us ultimately to a war with China. No question in my mind about it. I'm not sure about Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't like war, in my view. And he certainly doesn't want a war with China, regardless of some of the tariffs and other things he's putting in place. He doesn't want a war. And I think he intuits that the Chinese don't want a war either. Xi Jinping doesn't want a war. So this inexorable power shift cannot be fought in a way that will be victorious. You can only deepen, accelerate, and make worse the power shift, and perhaps even produce the war that you want and they don't. And that's a war with China, which you are going to lose. And then you're going to go nuclear. And then the whole world's going to lose. So how do you deal with this power shift, accommodate it, and at the same time keep your own standard of living, your own economy powerful and so forth? Because the Chinese will let you do that. And India will let you do that. And those other countries that are now arming against you, not with weapons, but with financial might, will accommodate you if you just don't come at them with this idea that you want what they've got, come hell or high water, and you will sanction them or attack them to get it. That's the way they look at us. What do you do that over? Well, you do it over the two humongous challenges that we have at this moment that will eliminate us if we don't deal with them. The changing climate. How would I talk to Donald Trump about that? He thinks it's a hoax. All the people around him who are his principal advisors have told him it's a hoax. So how do you deal with Donald Trump over that? That's a conundrum there. And the second is nuclear weapons. Now, I can deal with him on nuclear weapons. He knows that we need to get Xi Jinping and Putin to sit down, and we need to get them to pull all their would-be allies in who are nuclear armed, like North Korea, us, Israel, and sit down and make a multilateral treaty mechanism that might work to control these damn weapons and to start them down again rather than up. We got a nuclear arms race going on now. So those two major challenges should be enough for us to work together, almost like a condominium of power, even though the one side is leaking power rather volatilely to the other side. But there's got to be a happy medium in there if you're going to live in a world without war, and basically marked by peaceful relations. That's not what Biden, Blinken, and Sullivan wanted to do. They wanted to contest this to the very nuclear war we would have with China, and then we would all lose. Trump is a different person, and I think if someone were to get to him and talk to him in these terms, I'm not sure he would accept that we're ultimately going to lose this economic battle. But that could take 1,000 years. It could take 100 years, 200 years, 300,000 years, whatever, for all this shift to take place. And then who's to say it isn't going to mellow out and maybe become an equilibrium? I call it a condominium that lives in comedy, collaboration, cooperation, and peace instead of war, sanctions, and hatred. Now, that's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream we're working towards. I mean, after all, NATO brought years of peace to Europe. Look at how many years of peace we've had in Europe. It's falling now. It's crumbling. But we need to get something going that addresses this power shift, addresses it peacefully, diplomatically, and everyone comes out of it a winner rather than a loser.